Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, also known as the Rock, began life as a military fort. Although developed originally as a defensive structure with a functioning lighthouse, towers, and cannon lining strong fortifications of a main citadel, it soon became clear that the location was much better suited to a prison. An island, Alcatraz was surrounded by sea and a distance of 1.25 miles, or 1.25 miles, to the San Francisco Bay. The water had strong currents and you could easily be washed out to sea. Therefore, any escape was an extremely daunting task. The entire island was just 22 acres of barren land, which meant any escape that did occur would require traversing the natural barrier of the sea to the mainland. Therefore, even in the early days, prisoners were indeed housed there, including Confederate POWs, Native Americans, political prisoners, and any other undesirables that dared to challenge the authority of the United States military. Indeed, there were many actual military prisoners there as well. If you, for example, committed sodomy in the military, you might end up at Alcatraz. Indeed, in 1868, Alcatraz was officially designated as a long-term detention facility for military prisoners, constructing its first purpose-built jailhouse that year. In 1934, Alcatraz was converted into a federal prison that became world famous and the subject of this video. Quite an honor to appear on my channel. Daily life in Alcatraz was not what you would call luxurious. A bed and blanket, a desk, a wash basin, toilet and air vent on the back wall was all the prisoner had for company in his cell. Morris Anglin escape attempt, that is quite well known these days. They used the vent at the back wall, which went through to a utility corridor behind the cells, and they actually managed to scrape away using kitchen utensils, slowly scraping away the cement and replacing the grill with a lookalike, and they did in the end make a hole big enough to go into that utility corridor, which was the first stage of that particular escape attempt. So the rules were strict and each prisoner was gifted a personal copy. Inmates were entitled to food, clothing, shelter and medical. Everything else was considered a privilege. Cells were expected to be kept clean and ordered. Contraband was a strict no-no, which would often result in an immediate trip to the hole. Shaving 3 times a week was compulsory. Prisoners were allowed limited space and time to smoke as well as a privilege. Attempts to bribe, intimidate or assault prisoner officers was seen as a very serious offence and could even result in a harsh beating. Although that wasn't an official rule, that certainly would have happened. In early years, there was a strict code of silence. However, this rule was later relaxed as long as there was no shouting, loud talking, whistling, or singing. So, as Alcatraz was known to be problem prisoners, the idea of them not talking certainly would have been a concept to prevent them plotting, basically. Prisoners were expected to work and were given a list of jobs they could do, such as laundry, tailor shop, cobblers, model shop, gardening and labourer. Their earning did not go to the prison's pocket, but to a prisoner trust fund. There wasn't much chance for a lie-in before work, as prisoners were woken at 6:30 a.m. and sent for breakfast at 6:55 a.m. Work itself kicking off at just 7:30 a.m. Lunch was relatively early, also at 11:20. Dinner was at 16:25, and lights out at 9:30 p.m. meant there was a harsh regime. As many prisoners at Alcatraz were either considered extremely dangerous to the public or known for escapes, 6 guards patrolled the 4 cell blocks all night, swapping in shifts. Indeed, daily life at Alcatraz was just a very strict routine with not much in the way of reward, and a lot of prisoners became suicidal, favouring death over continuing. So one of the actual cool things about Alcatraz was that they had a library which was located at the end of D block. Upon entering Alcatraz, every inmate was given a library card and a catalogue of books found in the library. Inmates could place orders by putting a slip with their card in a box at the entrance to the dining hall, and the books would be delivered to and from their cell by a librarian. The library, which utilised a closed stack paging system, had a collection of 10,000 to 15,000 books, mainly left over from the army days. There was a good mix of personalities at Alcatraz among the inmates, but there was certainly a lot of high profile, kind of unusual loopy type of characters, some of which actually quite had the capacity to become quite cultured. And indeed, most of these actually had read a lot of books. It says the average prisoner read 75 to 100 books a year. Every evening, inmates would generally read books loaned from the library, and usually an hour or 75 minutes was allocated to the practicing of musical instruments, from the guitar to the accordion. A prison band often practiced in the dining room or auditorium above it. So quite the bookworms, but then again, there was not much entertainment, so, reading became pretty popular. This was definitely in the days before TVs and video games in cells. Inmates were permitted a maximum of 3 books in addition of up to 12 textbooks, a Bible and a dictionary. They were permitted to subscribe to magazines, but crime-related pages were torn out and newspapers were prohibited. Sex, crime and violence were censored from all books and magazines, and the library was governed by a chaplain who regulated the censorship and the nature of the reading material to ensure that the material was wholesome. Failure to return a library book would result in often the removal of privileges. So books, but also musical instruments, and just to mention, Al Capone was actually famous for practicing his banjo in the shower block. So the structure of Alcatraz. Alcatraz cell house had a corridor naming system named after major American streets and landmarks. Michigan Avenue was the corridor to the side of A block. Broadway was the central corridor in which the inmates would assemble as they massed through Times Square, an area with a clock on the wall, before entering the dining hall for their meals. Broadway separated Block B and Block C, and prisoners kept along it had the least privacy in the prison. The corridor between Block C and the library was called Park Avenue. The corridor in D Block was named Sunset Strip. Gun galleries lay at the end of each block, including the west and east gun galleries, and the guards would indeed shoot. A block was known to be a lot more modern than a lot of the rest of the prison. B block was where a lot of the new arrivals were first assigned, but probably the most interesting and most notorious was D block, which was a treatment block for some of the worst inmates with varying degrees of punishment, including isolation, solitary and strip. Prisoners usually spent anywhere from 3 to 19 days in solitary. Prisoners held here would be given their meals in their cells, were not permitted to work, and could only shower twice a week. After a 1939 escape attempt in which Arthur Doc Barker was killed, the Bureau of Prisons tightened security in the D block. The Birdman of Alcatraz inhabited cell 42 in D block in solitary confinement for 6 years. So that's 6 years of pretty much just being on your own. twiddling your thumbs. That is a serious punishment, to be honest. There is obviously a famous film and book about the Birdman, getting his name from his study of birds in an earlier prison stay in Leavenworth. Stroud also became a published author. So there's a quote from a fellow called Henry Young, testifying of his experiences in the hole at Alcatraz during his 1941 trial. Its size was approximately that of a regular cell, 9 feet by 5 feet by about 7 feet high. I could just touch the ceiling by stretching out my arm. You are stripped nude and pushed into the cell. Guards take your clothes and go over them minutely for what few grains of tobacco may have fallen into the cuffs or pockets. There is no soap, no tobacco, no toothbrush. The smell, well, you can only describe it by the word stink. It is like stepping into a sewer. It is purely nauseating. For bedding, you get 2 blankets around 5 in the evening. You have no shoes, no bed, no mattress, nothing but the 4 damp walls and 2 blankets. The walls are painted black. Once a day I got 3 slices of bread. No, that is an error. Some days I got 4. I got 1 meal in 5 days and nothing but bread in between. In the entire 13 days I was there, I got 2 meals. I have seen but 1 man get a bath in solitary in all the time I have been there, and that man had a bucket of cold water thrown over him. So Alcatraz really wasn't the place to misbehave. The whole of Alcatraz was no fun, and you had to face complete sensory and social isolation, just left away and forgotten from the world. It was definitely a wise idea while staying there for any prisoner to get with the program and not make life more difficult. On the 2nd floor was the hospital and the auditorium, which was where movies were screened to the inmates on weekends. This, of course, would have been a major attraction and something to look forward to. The dining hall, otherwise referred to as the mess hall, is where the prisoners and staff ate their meals. It is a long wing on the west end of the main cell house of Alcatraz. So dining was a scripted process, including a whistle system to indicate which block and tier of men would move into and out of the hall. There's actually a breakfast menu still preserved on the hallway board dated March 21st, 1963. This reads as assorted dry cereals, steamed whole wheat, scrambled egg, milk, stewed fruit, toast, bread and butter. Each dining table had benches which held up to 6 men, although smaller tables and chairs later replaced these, which seated 4. All of the prisoners, including the guards, would dine together, and thus there was space for over 250 people. The food at Alcatraz was actually supposed to be among the best of the United States prison system. So the recreation yard was a strip of concrete not 100 meters long. There was guard towers and a gun gallery surrounding it. These could and would shoot, although I believe they would shoot a warning shot generally. Someone actually once tried to climb over the fence of Alcatraz. He got to the top and one of the guard towers let off a couple of rounds at him, killing him. So prisoners were permitted out into the yard on Saturdays and Sundays and on holidays for a maximum of 5 hours. Inmates who worked 7 days a week in the kitchen were rewarded with short yard breaks during the weekdays. So it was just a strip of concrete other than a large stone staircase, and is just as featured in the Clint Eastwood film. That is the actual location where the African American gang actually sit themselves on the stone staircase. So most inmates actually entertain themselves other than just standing and talking or smoking. They also played baseball out in the yard, and there were actually at one time 4 amateur and 4 pro teams that played, and they would enjoy themselves having various tournaments. So the actual prison population, most of the prisoners were notorious bank robbers and murderers, including escape artists, people who'd escaped from other jails. In its 29 years in service, it held some of the most notorious criminals in American history, including gangsters such as Al Capone, Robert Franklin Stroud, who was the Birdman of Alcatraz, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Bumpy Johnson. Also political terrorists such as Rafael Cancel Miranda, a member of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party who attacked the United States Capitol building in 1954. Others included Mickey Cohen, Arthur R. Doc Baker, and Alvin Creepy Carpis, who served more time at Alcatraz than any other inmate. It also provided housing for the Bureau of Prison staff and their families. So it was actually possible to physically escape Alcatraz. If you could get out, you could in theory swim all the way to the shore. However, in 29 years of operation, this was never officially done. The penitentiary claimed that no prisoner made a successful escape. A total of 36 prisoners made 14 escape attempts, 2 men trying twice. 23 were caught alive, 6 were shot and killed during their escape, 2 drowned, and 5 are listed as missing and presumed dead. The most famous escape attempt was the Morris and Anglin brothers, and the official story was that they had drowned after getting out of the prison, and they actually got over the wall and set off into the water on a makeshift raft that they had built using stolen raincoats. Although what likely happened was not so much currents, but the tide, which generally would float you out to sea and eventually towards Japan, most likely. So although popular legend says that this escape attempt was successful perhaps, and they basically hid from authorities for the remaining years of their life, I guess the more likely option is that they did indeed drown trying this. At any rate, the prison was shortly shut down shortly thereafter. That escape attempt in 62, the prison was shut in 63, and since then Alcatraz has become a tourist attraction.